You ever think about how the most dangerous thing ain't always the storm, but the dead calm before it? The kind of calm that lulls you, whispers sweet nothings about security and peace, until you wake up to find yourself adrift, miles from any shore, the current slowly dragging you out to sea. It's funny, ain't it? How we chase that calm, that predictable rhythm, convinced it's the safest harbor. We build our fences high, lay our bricks thick, believing that if we just keep everything the same, nothing bad can ever get in. But sometimes, friend, that very sameness, that relentless pursuit of comfort, that's the thing that'll choke the life right out of you, slow as molasses in January. It'll dull your edges, soften your core, and before you know it, you're not living anymore, you're just existing. Just a shadow painted onto a wall. There was a man, see, who knew all about that kind of shadow. His name was Earl, and he was 45 years old, though the years looked like they'd been working him over a bit harder than average. Earl wasn't the kind of man you denotice in a crowd, not unless you were looking for him. He moved through the world with the quiet gravity of a well-worn machine, dependable, functional, entirely without flash. You could call him a factory man, and you wouldn't be wrong. He'd spent the better part of 3 decades punching a clock at the old Allied manufacturing plant, feeding parts into hungry presses, watching the same monotonous dance of metal on metal, day in, day out. His face was a map of that life, etched with lines that weren't quite wrinkles of laughter but more like the faint creases in a blueprint, the steady pressure of routine. His jaw was set perpetually as if holding back a sigh or a complaint, neither of which he ever offered freely. His eyes, though. Those were the real tell. They were a muted shade of blue, like denim faded from too many washes, and they held a deep, quiet weariness. Not the kind that screamed for sleep, but the kind that came from seeing the same thing for too long, from carrying a silent load day after day without complaint. They were the eyes of a man who worked hard because that's what a man did, who provided because that was his duty, and who didn't ask for much beyond the predictable comfort of tomorrow being just like today. You could see the honesty in them, the bedrock integrity, but also something else, something just barely beneath the surface, a longing perhaps, or a question he'd never allowed himself to voice. Earl's hands were what truly spoke volumes. They were the hands of a craftsman, not in the artistic sense, but in the practical, relentless way of a man who makes things happen with muscle and grit. Thick-knuckled and calloused, permanently stained with the faint, inky grime of grease and steel dust, even after they'd been scrubbed raw. His fingernails were short, practical, often with a sliver of darkness tucked stubbornly underneath. They were strong hands, capable hands, hands that had hoisted and hammered and tightened and nudged and guided 1,000 times over, perfecting the small, repetitive motions of his trade. When he'd offer you that gruff, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement, the one that served as his standard greeting, you might just catch the slight tremor in them, not of weakness, but of a quiet, constant exertion. He was a man built for enduring, for the long haul, for weathering whatever came without making a fuss. He embodied the silent strength of the working class, a pillar of routine, a man who seemed to all outward appearances content in his steady, unchanging world. But appearances, as they often are, can be mighty deceptive. Earl's mornings began the same way they had for 25 years. A harsh, unyielding beep from the alarm clock on his bedside table, slicing through the pre-dawn quiet at precisely 5 o'clock. He didn't use a snooze button. There was no point. The factory whistle, a different kind of scream, would follow soon enough, and the rhythms of the plant allowed no tardiness, no fogginess. He'd swing his feet to the cold floor, the familiar chill a tiny shock that helped clear the last vestiges of sleep. Every movement was a practiced ballet of efficiency in the dim light of the bedroom. The quiet creak of the floorboards, the muted splash of water as he splashed his face, the whisper of his work clothes as he pulled them on, the same faded blue shirt, the sturdy jeans, the steel-toed boots that had walked miles of factory floor. Downstairs, the coffee was already brewing, Sarah's silent offering. A dark, bitter comfort that he drank quickly, standing by the kitchen counter, gazing out at the still dark street. His small house, neat and well-maintained, held the faint scent of toast from the kids' breakfast the night before, a ghost of family life he would miss in the coming hours. He'd grab his lunchbox, packed by Sarah, same sandwich, same apple, same thermos of black coffee, and be out the door before the sun even thought about stretching. The drive was a short, silent affair, the rumble of his old pickup truck a familiar drone in the quiet of the morning, ferrying him towards the monolithic silhouette of the plant, its windows glowing like tired eyes in the distance. Inside the factory, the world changed. The air was thick with the smell of machining oil and hot metal, a smell that had long ago stopped being a smell and just became part of breathing. The incessant clang and whir of machinery, the rhythmic thud of presses, the hiss of hydraulics, it was a symphony of labor, loud and relentless. Earl's station was in the assembly line, a familiar stretch of conveyor belt where he'd spend 8, sometimes 10, hours performing the exact same sequence of tasks. Fasten this bolt, check that gauge, connect these wires. His hands, those capable, enduring hands, moved with an almost unconscious precision, honed over decades into extensions of the machines themselves. The work was mindless in its repetition, yet demanding in its physical toll, and in the constant need for vigilance against error. Time inside the factory wasn't measured by the clock on the wall, but by the endless procession of parts, each one identical to the last, each one a testament to another minute, another hour, slowly, inevitably passing. He didn't complain, not out loud anyway. Complaining wouldn't change anything, and it certainly wouldn't pay the bills. The bills were a silent, persistent hum in the background of his life, louder than any factory noise. Mortgage payments, car insurance, rising grocery costs, Lily's braces, Ethan's school trips. They piled up on the kitchen table in neat stacks, demanding attention, demanding the steady, unchanging stream of income his factory job provided. There was no cushion, no real savings for a rainy day, just the tightrope walk of making ends meet, week after predictable week. It was a comfortable predictability, he told himself, a safe harbor. But lately even the comfort felt heavy, like a shroud. Beneath the surface of this ordered, unchanging life, something else stirred, a quiet disquiet he rarely acknowledged. Earl used to sketch. When he was a boy, he'd fill notebooks with intricate drawings of machines, of fantastical cities, of the intricate gears and levers of some imagined future. He'd dreamed of being an engineer, of designing something, building something from scratch that had never existed before. That young man, full of quiet ambition, felt like a stranger now, a ghost from another life. The dream had slowly eroded, little by little, replaced by the crushing weight of practicality, the need for a steady paycheck, the fear of failure. He'd looked at the safe path, the one his father and his father's father had taken, and walked it without question. Now that choice felt less like security and more like a cage. He saw the world passing him by on the news, on the internet that Lily and Ethan navigated with such ease. He saw people creating, adapting, thriving in ways he couldn't even fathom. A dull ache settled in his chest, a yearning for something he couldn't name, a vague sense of inadequacy. He questioned if he was smart enough, creative enough, capable enough to do anything else. He was good at enduring, yes. Good at showing up, putting in the hours, providing. But what else? The thought often arrived late at night, when Sarah was asleep beside him, and the house was utterly silent, save for the rhythmic tick of the grandfather clock downstairs. He'd lie there, staring at the ceiling, feeling the slow, heavy beat of his own heart, and a quiet panic would begin to spread. His body, once strong and resilient, felt stiffer, slower, prone to aches and pains that hadn't been there a few years ago. He was getting tired quicker, breathing heavier, and sometimes his heart would flutter in a way that made him catch his breath. He'd dismiss it, of course. Just getting older, he'd tell himself. Everyone gets tired. Everyone aches. But the unspoken fear lingered. He was trapped, and his body was starting to give out, slowly but surely, under the relentless, unchanging pressure of a life he wasn't sure he'd ever truly chosen. This comfort zone, this careful, predictable existence, was slowly but surely killing the man he could have been, leaving only the shadow of the man he was. The mundane rhythm that defined Earl's life, the one he clung to like a drowning man to driftwood, was about to be shattered. It started like any other Tuesday. The greasy smell of the factory floor, the clang of machinery, the familiar faces, everything was in its appointed place. But there was a whisper running through the lines, a low hum of unease that wasn't from the machines. Folks kept checking their phones, then looking up with worried eyes. Management had been in closed-door meetings all morning, and the plant manager, Mr. Henderson, a man usually as jovial as a summer barbecue, had a face like he'd just seen a ghost. Then came the all-staff meeting, called with barely an hour's notice. Everyone gathered, a sea of blue collars and tired faces, in the main assembly area. The air was thick with unspoken questions. Earl stood near the back, his arms crossed, a knot forming in his stomach. He told himself it was just a new regulation, maybe a shift in production, anything but what his gut was screaming. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat, but the words still caught. Due to unforeseen market conditions and a strategic restructuring, the jargon hit Earl like a physical blow. He wasn't listening to the words anymore, just the sinking dread. He saw the color drain from the faces around him, heard a soft gasp from a woman near the front. The plant will be closing permanently in 3 months. The silence that followed was deafening, a vacuum where the hum of machines and the chatter of men used to be. Then it erupted, a cacophony of shouts, questions, curses. Earl didn't move. His vision blurred at the edges. 30 years. 30 years of showing up, of quiet dedication, of believing this steady grind was his family's bedrock. Gone, just like that. A cold sweat prickled his skin, and his heart hammered against his ribs, not with anger but with a terrifying, hollow dread. It felt like the ground had just fallen out from under him. He stumbled back, leaning against a support beam, trying to catch his breath, the metallic taste of fear in his mouth. That same week, the nagging chest pain he'd been ignoring for months flared up with a vengeance. The stress of the plant closing, the sheer terror of an unknown future had taken its toll. Sarah, seeing him pale and clutching his chest, had practically dragged him to the walk-in clinic. The doctor, a young woman with a kind but serious face, looked at the readings on her screen, then at Earl, then back at the screen. "Earl," she said gently, "your blood pressure is dangerously high. And frankly, you're showing significant signs of exhaustion. We need to do some more tests, but this isn't just getting older. This is your body screaming for help. Your lifestyle needs to change, now." Her words echoed the plant manager's, only instead of a factory, it was his own body that was shutting down. The comfort zone, the predictability he'd cherished, had become a poison. It hadn't just stalled his dreams, it was actively killing him physically. He left the clinic with a prescription for blood pressure medication and a referral for a stress test, his head spinning. 2 pillars of his life, his job, his health, collapsing simultaneously. The plant closure threatened his family's financial survival. His failing health threatened his very ability to fight for them. He felt utterly exposed, utterly vulnerable. The safe life he'd built was nothing but a house of cards, now crumbling in the wind. That night, the quiet panic Earl usually held at bay refused to be silenced. Sarah was a warm weight beside him, her breathing soft and even a testament to her simpler, healthier sleep. But sleep was a distant country for Earl. The clock downstairs ticked away the minutes, each one an accusation, counting down not just to dawn, but to the end of everything he knew. He stared at the darkened ceiling, the familiar shadows dancing with the headlights of the occasional passing car, and for the first time in his life, he saw his existence with brutal honesty. He was 45, and he had nothing to show for it but a factory job that was about to disappear, a mortgage that felt like a lead weight, and a body that was failing him. The doctor's words replayed. "Your lifestyle needs to change, now. But change to what?" He hadn't learned anything new in decades. He hadn't dared. He'd meticulously avoided any challenge, any risk, any opportunity that might shake the fragile equilibrium of his world. He'd called it being responsible. He saw now it was cowardice. He thought of the dull ache in his chest, the constant tiredness, the way he puffed just climbing the stairs. He dismissed it as normal, but the doctor hadn't. This safe, comfortable life, the one he'd burrowed into like a badger in its set, was suffocating him. He'd traded vitality for predictability, ambition for apathy. Lily and Ethan's faces flashed in his mind, then Sarah's. What kind of example was he? A man who let life happen to him, who endured rather than truly lived. The silent house, normally a sanctuary, now felt like a tomb, a testament to a life lived too small. A single tear tracked a path through the faint stubble on his cheek. He was scared, terribly, profoundly scared. Of failure, yes, but more than that, of continuing to live this half-life. He was tired of being tired. He was tired of the fear. He was tired of the slow, creeping death of his own potential. The man he could have been, the dreams he'd buried under layers of routine and comfort, screamed from the depths of his soul. He had built a cage, and now the cage was falling apart, leaving him exposed, vulnerable, and utterly alone in the dark. And somewhere in that raw, desolate moment, a flicker ignited, a desperate, defiant spark. The spark wasn't hope, not yet. It was something colder, harder, a refusal. He wasn't going to just fade, not like this. Not for Sarah, not for Lily and Ethan. Not for the ghost of the man he was supposed to be. He slid off the bed, his feet finding the cold wood floor. The house groaned around him, a sleeping beast. He walked to the window, pulled back the thin curtain. Outside, the streetlights cast long, indifferent shadows. The world kept turning, whether Earl lived or died, succeeded or failed. And suddenly, in that stark realization, he understood. The comfort he'd chased, the predictability he'd clung to like a drowning man to a plank, that was the real enemy. It had lulled him into a stupor, slowly robbing him of his breath, his purpose. It wasn't a plank, it was an anchor. He closed his eyes, took a deep, shuddering breath that felt like it scraped against his lungs. "Enough!" he whispered into the dark, the word raw and unfamiliar on his tongue. It wasn't a roar, not a defiant shout, just a quiet, determined enough. Enough of the fear, enough of the waiting, enough of being a ghost in his own life. He didn't have a plan, not a single concrete idea. All he knew was that whatever came next, it couldn't be this. This slow, comfortable march to oblivion, this path had almost killed him, piece by careful, calculated piece. The future was a blank wall, daunting and terrifying. But for the first time in years, it wasn't just a wall of fear, it was also a wall of possibility. He just had to figure out how to climb, or maybe how to knock it down. The next morning, the exhaustion was still there, a familiar weight on his shoulders, but something else had settled in its place, a brittle, unfamiliar resolve. Sarah looked at him over her coffee, a silent question in her eyes. He just shook his head slightly, a wordless promise he wasn't ready to articulate. He still went to the plant. He still worked the line. The announcement hadn't closed the doors yet, but the clock was ticking louder now, a constant drumbeat in the cavernous factory. Every rivet, every weld, every drone of the machinery felt like a final, mournful song. The comfort zone was dissolving beneath his feet. After his shift, the usual heavy dread tried to pull him back, to drag him into his recliner to the numb comfort of a stale beer and the flickering TV. Almost killed him. The words echoed in his head like a siren, an insistent, unwelcome truth. He drove home, but didn't turn into his driveway. Just kept driving. Sarah would wonder. The kids would too. But for once he ignored the little voice, the insidious whisper that screamed, "Routine, safety, what will people think?" He passed the old high school track, overgrown and forgotten, barely visible behind a chain-link fence. A memory flickered him, younger, leaner, running laps till his lungs burned, till his legs felt like jelly. He'd loved that feeling, the exhaustion that wasn't tiredness but accomplishment, the feeling of earning his rest. He pulled into the cracked parking lot of the high school. The track was even worse up close. Patches of weeds pushed through the asphalt, uneven and pockmarked. A gust of wind kicked up dust and old leaves, swirling them around his truck. He got out, the door closing with a rusty thud. His work boots felt like anchors. His jeans felt too tight, chafing with every step. He hadn't run in 20 years, not really. His blood pressure, his doctor had said. His heart. All the things he'd ignored covered up with busyness and beer. His chest felt tight just thinking about it, a premonition of the agony to come. Every fiber of his 45-year-old body screamed protest. "Go home, Earl. Have a beer. You'll figure it out tomorrow. This is stupid. You'll hurt yourself." This was it, wasn't it? The first real battle, not against a layoff notice or a doctor's grim prognosis, but against himself. Against the soft, inviting lie of his own comfort. He took a deep breath, the cold air scraping at his throat. One foot in front of the other. That was it. Just one foot. He started to jog, more of a lumbering shuffle, really. His lungs burned within 10 seconds, a searing fire he hadn't felt since he was a kid chasing a fly ball. His calves screamed. His hamstrings, dormant for decades, tightened like steel cables. He felt ridiculous, a puffing, red-faced caricature of a man shuffling around a decrepit track in work boots and jeans. He swore he could hear the weeds laughing. After maybe half a lap, a quarter mile at best, he stopped, hands on his knees, gasping for air that felt thick and unwilling to fill his lungs. His heart hammered like a jackhammer in his chest, so loud he wondered if it would burst through his ribs. Sweat poured down his face, stinging his eyes. He thought of the doctor's warning. High blood pressure, exhaustion, almost killed him. "This is stupid," he wheezed, the words barely audible. His mind, the familiar voice of doubt and complacency, was already packing its bags for home, ready to slip back into the warm, soft blankets of his old life. One try, Earl. You tried. Now go home. But something was different this time. The shame of giving up felt heavier than the pain in his legs. The memory of Sarah's worried eyes, Lily's quiet questions about college, Ethan's innocent reliance on him, it all solidified into a stubborn lump in his gut. He couldn't go home, not like this, not back to where the comfort almost killed him, so he walked. He walked the rest of the lap, then another. His legs ached with a dull, throbbing pain he'd forgotten existed. His chest still felt tight. But by the time he got back to his truck, a tiny, almost imperceptible sliver of something new had taken root. He was still standing. He hadn't quit. The next morning, his alarm went off at 4:30 a.m. Every muscle in his body felt like it had been pummeled with a baseball bat. Getting out of bed was an act of raw willpower. Sarah stirred beside him. "You all right, Earl?" she mumbled, half asleep. Just gonna stretch a bit, he grunted, lying through clenched teeth. Knock out, careful not to wake the kids. The track looked even bleaker in the pre-dawn gloom. Day 3 was worse than day 1. The initial shock had worn off, replaced by the grim reality of repetition. The pain wasn't new anymore. It was an old, unwelcome friend waiting for him every morning. He wanted to sleep in. He wanted the donut and coffee from the convenience store. He craved the easy, mind-numbing predictability of the factory floor. He told himself he was tired. He told himself he had earned a break. He started running, and 30 seconds in, he felt a sudden, sharp stab in his knee. He limped to a stop, clutching it. "That's it," he muttered, looking up at the gray sky. "Sign from God. Go home, Earl." He stood there for a long time, the cold wind biting at his exposed skin, a tremor running through his body that wasn't just from the chill. He wasn't just hurting physically. He was hurting inside, deep down where the fear lived. The fear of being useless, of failing his family, of facing a world he hadn't prepared for. He saw himself, a broken-down old man at 45, the factory closing, nowhere to go. And that image, that sickening, gut-wrenching dread was stronger than the pain in his knee, stronger than the urge to quit. He ignored his knee. He started walking again, slowly at first, then picking up pace, a determined, stubborn march around the uneven track. He didn't run, he just walked. He walked 4 laps that day, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cold. His knee throbbed, but he kept going, a silent defiance against the part of him that wanted to break. He was a mule, not a racehorse. And mules, well, mules just kept pulling. By day 7, the thought of quitting was still a constant companion, a nagging whisper in his ear. But it had started to sound a little less convincing. The deep, searing pain in his muscles was slowly giving way to a duller ache, a familiar soreness that he was starting to almost understand. He still shuffled more than ran, but he was covering more ground before he had to walk. Sometimes he'd find himself lost in the rhythm of his breathing, the crunch of his worn sneakers on the gravelly track, the slow, steady burn in his lungs. It wasn't pleasant, not by a long shot, but it wasn't entirely agonizing anymore either. He'd come home, showered, and then headed to work, the ghost of exhaustion still clinging to him. But now, when he hit the factory floor, he noticed something. He wasn't as winded climbing the stairs. His back didn't ache as much after standing all day. The monotony of the press felt less like a cage and more like just work. He was still Earl, still quiet, still kept to himself. But something was shifting, a subtle tightening in his frame, a clearer glint in his tired eyes. He was pushing through the exhaustion now, not just enduring it. After 2 full weeks, he missed a day. Not on purpose. He just slept through his alarm, the deep sleep finally claiming him. He woke with a jolt, guilt flooding him. He'd failed. He'd proven that little voice right. But then, an hour later, he found himself pulling into the track parking lot after work, something he'd never done before. The afternoon sun was warm. He ran, and it was hard, every bit as hard as the mornings. But the shame of missing a day was a stronger fuel than the morning cold had ever been. He understood now that failing wasn't the end. It was just a reason to get back up. He was finding a different kind of strength, not the kind that came from lifting weights, but the kind that came from staring down your own weakness and telling it to get lost. Around day 20, something truly shifted. It wasn't a sudden revelation, more like the slow turning of a massive, rusty gear. He was still tired, sure. His body still complained. But the deep, soul-crushing dread that had clung to him like a damp blanket in the mornings had begun to lift. He was still showing up at the track, but now he was almost looking forward to it. Not for the run itself, not yet, but for the quiet victory of it. For the proof, concrete and undeniable, that he was capable of doing something hard, something uncomfortable, day after brutal day. He started noticing little things. His work shirt, a size he'd worn for years, felt a little looser around the waist. He could take the stairs 2 at a time at the plant without getting winded. One morning, as he was lacing up his sneakers, he caught his reflection in the bathroom mirror. He was still Earl, still with the lines etched around his eyes and the gray streaking his temples. But there was a new firmness to his jaw, a new steadiness in his gaze. He looked sharper, more present. Sarah noticed too. "You've been sleeping better, Earl," she observed one evening, watching him clear the dinner table with a spring in his step she hadn't seen in years. He just grunted, a quiet acknowledgement. But inside, he felt a warmth spread through him. He was present. He wasn't just a ghost moving through his own life anymore. Lily even asked him to help her with a tough math problem, something he usually deferred to Sarah. He sat down, thought it through, and patiently explained it. The mental fog that used to cloud his brain seemingly dissipated. He felt clearer, sharper. The daily ritual at the track, once a torturous chore, had become his anchor. It was still a fight every single time, but it was a fight he was winning. And in winning that small, daily battle, he started to believe he could win the bigger ones. The fear of the plant closing hadn't vanished, but it had transformed. It wasn't a paralyzing dread anymore. It was a challenge, a puzzle, and for the first time in a long time, Earl felt like he might actually have the tools to solve it. The thought of night classes, of learning something new, of stepping into the unknown, it no longer felt like a death sentence. It felt like an adventure. A terrifying, exhilarating adventure. He was embracing the struggle, and it was unlocking parts of himself he didn't even know existed. He was still sore, still tired. But he was alive, really, truly alive. The thought of night classes, it wasn't just an adventure anymore. It was an imperative. The next week, after another grueling shift at the plant, the air thick with whispered anxieties about the closure, Earl found himself in the parking lot of the community college. His heart thumped a rhythm different from his usual tired beat. This was not the familiar hum of the factory floor. This was the silent, unnerving hum of the unknown. He walked through the automatic doors, past bright-eyed students clutching textbooks, and felt a pang of deep insecurity. 45 years old, and he felt like he was starting kindergarten again. He signed up for a program in industrial automation technology, a fancy name for the new brains behind the machines. His hands, accustomed to wrenches and grease, felt clumsy on a keyboard. The first few nights were a brutal reminder of how much his brain had atrophied. He'd stare at equations, at lines of code, feeling a frustration so intense it made his teeth ache. He'd come home, head buzzing, and pore over textbooks after the kids were asleep, Sarah sometimes joining him at the kitchen table with her own book. He felt like an old engine trying to turn over on a cold morning, sputtering, coughing, but slowly, surely, catching. He wasn't just learning about new machines, he was learning about himself. He discovered a knack for problem-solving that went beyond fixing a faulty conveyor belt. He found a quiet satisfaction in understanding complex systems, in seeing how all the pieces fit. His instructors, initially seeing a quiet, older man who seemed out of place, started to notice his meticulous work, his stubborn refusal to quit until he understood. The changes weren't just mental. The daily runs, once just a way to outrun the demons, started to feel good. He lost weight, not a lot at first, but enough that his old work pants hung a little looser. His cheeks, once a pasty gray, took on a healthier hue. One morning he caught a glimpse of himself in the bathroom mirror, and for the first time in years he didn't just see a tired man. He saw a man with a jawline, a spark in his eye. He saw a fighter. His blood pressure numbers dropped to a healthier range, a quiet victory confirmed by his relieved doctor. The plant closure, when it finally came, hit hard just as everyone expected. But Earl wasn't blindsided. He was ready. He had his certification in hand, along with a stack of resumes he'd meticulously tailored. He applied to half a dozen places, not just any factory, but places that were looking for skilled automation technicians. Each interview was another test, another step outside his comfort zone. He stumbled on some technical questions, sure, but he spoke with a confidence born of earned knowledge, not bravado. He talked about his years of factory experience, how he understood the practicalities, not just the theory. He told them he was willing to learn, to work harder than anyone else. A few weeks later, the phone rang. It was an offer, not a factory floor job, not exactly. It was for a smaller, newer company that designed custom automation solutions for other businesses. It was a step up with better pay and a whole lot more challenge. He'd be on a team, learning and innovating, not just clocking in and out. He took it. He sat at the kitchen table that night, the job offer letter spread out before him. Sarah read it, a hand over her mouth, tears in her eyes. Lily, ever the pragmatist, calculated the new salary. Ethan just looked at his dad with a reverence Earl hadn't seen before. "Dad," Ethan said, "you did it." Earl looked at his calloused hands, hands that had known nothing but the grind for 25 years. Now they were ready for something new. He thought back to those dark nights, the fear, the exhaustion, the quiet dread of a life unlived. "I always thought safe was the best way," he finally said, his voice rough with emotion but clear. He looked up at his family, at the home they'd built, knowing it wasn't just the walls and the roof that made it secure, but the fight in him. "Turns out safe just meant I wasn't really living. When things fell apart, I had to fight, and that's when I found out what I was actually made of. You gotta lean into the hard stuff, that's where the real good is. That's where you find out who you're supposed to be." It wasn't a grand epiphany in a thunderclap. It was a quiet knowing, forged in the sweat of early morning runs and late-night studying. It was the understanding that the comfort zone, the easy path, had been slowly eroding him, like water dripping on stone. And the struggle, the hard work, the fear faced head-on, that was the chisel that had carved out something stronger, something real. There are men out there, men just like Earl, quiet and hardworking, who think the best way to live is to keep your head down and ride the current. But sometimes,